Hi everyone, I want to sorry in advance for my awful accent and for default theme of Google Slides and for a lot of other things, but I'll better start with my talk. I'll explain about who I am a bit later, when it would be like more put in context, and now I just wanted to give a quick overview of what we will be talking about. I want to talk with you about why the language we are writing in matters, what is the spirit of Ruby and how it is matters, why the Ruby should change and how it is changes, and finally about some things that disturb people, including me, including probably you, when Ruby changes or when it doesn't changes when we wanted it to change. So the first part, I marked them so you'll know how much you need to bear with me more. I wanted to start with this quote from the old sci-fi novel about some alien language which allowed to pass information super effectively. Please raise your hand if you know this quote and what novel it came from. Boomer. So it's an old sci-fi classic, Samuel Delany's Babel 17. It's very unusual for sci-fi classic because it's, so to say, linguistic novel. It has all spaceships and wars and aliens and so on, but mostly it is about the language that is more effective than any of them, of any known languages, and by this it changes the thinking of those who talk or think in this language. It is based on so-called Shepelev hypothesis that language shapes how you think. In its strong forms, that language fully shapes your thinking, it's disproven, but in a weak form, that language affects your thinking, it's still a good hypothesis, or at least a good metaphor. So when I wanted to start with this linguistic stuff, I was not sure that it's appropriate for programming conference, but then I stumbled upon this slide. It's an introduction to the talk of the person we all know, and it's done in like 16 years ago, where Mats explicitly says that this Babel 17 thing inspired him to think about Ruby and to invent Ruby. First question of the talk, the programming language as a tool of thought, would be if the programming language is really a tool of thought. Because when we are starting programming, we frequently meet with people who say that professionals should like take any language and just write in it. Because the principle is the architecture is the same, the principles of those model view controller, or most recently some DDD, hexagonal architecture, and my experience say to do so, and my framework says to do so, and what language I'm writing in, it's probably not that important. But then there is also thinking from which starts from the phrases of the language. When you think about how you can say this idea in Ruby or in your Java or in your Python, and how your language, to make this natural for your language. And the interesting thing that those two ways of thinking about problems, they are not contradictory. We always do some balance of both. There are people who almost always ignore the phrase level thinking, and they can be successful. There are people who always think about any problem from the phrase level and then up to architectural level, and they also can be successful. But probably the most successful mix is mixing the both. So we can say that our experiences, that our frameworks, architectures, and so on, it's our tools, and the language in which thing is our material. And so my talk title is a lie, sorry. I want to talk about a programming language as a material of thought. So what's the properties of a good material when you work with it? First, it needs to be pliable. It needs to allow you to do what you imagine you wanted to do. You take it, you think, yeah, I want to make a car of it, or I want to make a plate of it, or something, and it allows you to work with it how you expect. But the very best materials are also insightful. You take it, you start to making your car or your plate, and you think, I haven't thought that probably I can use this material so this way or that way. In my hands, it makes me think about different ways of solving problems. So that would be the best fit. That material allows you to do what you wanted, but also implies that you can do something that you haven't thought about. And in general, that's how any creativity works. That you start with something that you are really familiar with, and you go to the areas that are implied and that you are unfamiliar with, and you search in this area. And generally, that's how the culture in general works. Yeah? OK. This topics that I wanted to talk about, it's highly personal for me. And I understand that it may be personal for the audience, because I'm talking about readable, about insights, about what's pretty and what's ugly, and it could be very, very charged. So what I can do here is I just can ask you to try my optics, to try see things my way, and even if you disagree with every particular slide, then maybe still it will help you to shape your own thinking and understand how you want to think about those problems. And here is where I probably should explain who I am and what this person who asked you to follow their thoughts and optics. So I am Victor Shepelev, also known to some of you probably as The Rock. I am from Ukraine, and that explains my awful, I know it's awful, my awful accent. And that's, so far, it's the farthest conference I've traveled. So I've been on RubyConfs in Kenya, in India, in Japan, in Poland, and they're all awesome in their own ways, but, well, I am writing in Ruby for more than 15 years. Most of the time, I managed to avoid Rails, but eventually I also and now I am writing in Rails too. I am working for the small Israeli startup RubyConf, which tries to revolutionize transcribing, including live transcribing. So at least I understand how much work the live transcribers put. And so I really want to thank Stacy for the hard work for this conference, because I understand that it's super hard. I am mentoring students both for money and voluntarily, and sometimes I just catch people on streets and mentor them Ruby. Yeah, I write a lot of open source software. Neither of it is particularly popular, but some of it is at least interesting. And last but not least, I am also not very popular, but proficient, so to say, writer and poet, which surprisingly relevant for this talk, because I believe it gives me perspective to talk about language and how language affects our thoughts. And few more things. I am really passionate about Ruby. So I am doing things for Ruby that maybe for some of you could be interesting. I am maintaining the like nicely formatted Ruby reference, formatted from official docs, and adding something to those docs to make it accessible for novices. I am maintaining commented Ruby changelog for the recent versions, and I will say it's quite good and helpful. I'm doing a lot of proposals to Ruby. Most of them got rejected, some of them got accepted, so I am that person that you should hate for Zen, if you hate Zen. Yeah, the last line of this slide, I believe it that I should put this disclaimer here, because I use Python as a small examples throughout the talk, not to say that Ruby is good, Python's bad, but to show how different design ideas lead to different thinking. Just to show the difference, not to like show my disgust to other languages. So, what is the spirit of Ruby from my subjective point of view that I at least want to present to you? Because if you start from some simple example of some Ruby class doing some simple things, it's easy to say that you can write almost the same code in almost any language, like with modern object-oriented language, being it Python or PHP or Java. Well, it will add type definitions or C++, and so on and so on and so on. But we know that Ruby is different somehow. So how it is different? First thing that comes to mind when somebody starts to learn Ruby, that we don't have cycles like normal people do. You know this, for something, in something. We have enumerables and method chaining and blocks. And blocks is the most unusual and maybe hard to grasp for novices, but the most cool idea in Ruby, because block is it makes functional programming, inline functional programming, natural in the way that blocks feel like they are in the same context, unlike you know, other languages that use some like old JavaScript that will write functions in the statement and so on. But blocks, they psychologically they bring the context here, and chaining the cycles to our enumerables makes us want some new and exciting things. Chaining some new other types of cycles shortens the blocks. Chaining enumerators, adding to the methods, converting them to another enumerators. Unpack parameters so it would be seen what comes to what parameter, and so on and so on. And this principle of chaining, of making the flow of values visible, is one of most important things in Ruby, which also manifests itself in implicit return, in that everything in Ruby is expression returning value, and so on and so on. Next, obviously, everything is an object. We're cool, everything is an object. But what do we mean when we say everything in Ruby is an object? We mean that wherever you are almost every statement is just some method call. Like when you are saying private something in class, it's not like the special reserved word that has some special syntax, special meaning. It's just modules method private. And everywhere where you go, you have just methods or something that you can repeat with methods, like defining class. It's easy to define class just by calling methods on object, because classes are object and new is just method, and so on and so on. This makes our environment in which we work very discoverable and very homogeneous. I remember like 15 years ago, 16, when I first started to work with Ruby, I was super fascinated just with one small fact, that when you want to floor a number, you just expect there would be number.floor, and it works. Other languages make different choices, like the same Python, which I don't hate, which makes some statements not a method calls, but like just functions in the language, and it shapes it differently, and it has like decorators which a separate construct and provide us some value that Ruby can't achieve with our current understanding, but we can't achieve different values. So then saying that everything is an object, we can say that it's better and more clear to say that everything is an object or a method call, unless it isn't like def, like class, like if, and so on. And it is also a very important choice. Smalltalk, which didn't made this choice and made if also a method and everything a method, stayed an esoteric language because it raised the learning curve for people. It's too unlike any other language. Ruby just solve it to you like it's just regular mainstream language, and then you are doomed. And last but not least, the thing that frequently overlooked about Ruby, that it has very rich and nice syntax. And it's some even say like we don't need it. We just can make it like shorter. We don't need such much of an aliases. Well, probably we don't need so many of aliases. But the rest, the important thing about the rest is that all of those small things in Ruby that we take for granted, why they are here? Because Ruby goes a long way, so you can say something in Ruby in exactly the amount of lexemes that is in your head. In other words, you don't need to unsee some syntax to say, okay, it's just like some defining a test, so you just ignore this like function def blah 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 blah, which we call it's our internal DSL, but our I don't know which language, whatever. But our language doesn't allow like remove this 6 pairs of brackets and so on. So you just need to unsee it, and then you can kind of see the structure. In Ruby, you see it immediately. So generally speaking, Ruby is a mainstream language with functional flow, which based on powerful object and values expressiveness. And returning to language as a material of thought, it makes us think the same way, or at least it makes me think this way, to defining a fluent flow of clear transformation on self-sufficient objects. Is it just me, or it feels like in a naive Rails code base, most of those principles are not so visible? Okay. So, if the language is so ideal, how I said before, why should it change? There are a bunch of important reasons, some of them secondary. They're important nevertheless, that some things like in the language, the spirit of the language is great, but some initial design choices are not so great or not respond to the moment on those like cryptic global variables that were cool at the age when you used scripting languages for one-off scripts and you just wanted to be expressive like once in a lifetime of this script, but then you don't need it. Another historical reason that probably nobody expected in an age of rise of scripting languages, that huge projects with thousands of people, with thousands of human hours would be created in those languages, and all of modern scripting languages should change to encompass this fact. Another reasons, also important but also secondary, are external, that the world requires that your language to be practical, to have this, and that. But that's not the point, in fact. The most important point that for Ruby to change, that it makes us to be used to be very clear, very expressive. And when we started to be able to say some things very clear, very expressive, we started to be able to express more complicated things and more complicated, and build larger system of interacting libraries and objects and projects and services. And we still want it to be as clear and as expressive as we use it to be when we talk about simple matters. So it's like we are inventing new words to talking about new materials, to talking to being able to say more. And why do we need new words? You know, we always can discuss anything with take this and put it there, and it would be okay. But to discuss something effectively, to discuss something in nuances, we need words for things that wasn't existing before, like, I don't know, computer, smartphone. You need a word for it, not say, you know, this shit that, you know this shit, yeah. We need more nuanced words, like we need to tell the grief of sorrow, of sadness. Not saying, I am like, but when you have more nuanced words, you can discuss more nuanced matters. And we need shortcut words for very complicated matters like accessibility or ecosystem, which you also can describe kind of as a paragraph of text, but when you have a new word which everybody have agreed about, and it brings new idioms based on it, new phrases based on it, you can discuss more complicated matters. And important thing with this comparison with natural language words, that new words should integrate with old ones, phonetically, semantically, syntactically. You can just throw, I don't know, Chinese hieroglyph into Ukrainian language and saying, okay, here is your new word, use it, everybody. The same way you can just throw in Ruby class named monad and say, okay, we now have monads, please use this monad. You need it to play nice with the rest of the language. So to summarize it, language is a living, breathing thing, and its evolution is targeting increasing its expressive power through natural evolution of the concepts that are already existing in the language. So now when you know that language should change, let's see how exactly the Ruby changes. We talked about that the most unique properties of Ruby is powerful objects, flow, and clear syntax. When we're thinking about powerful objects, we can clearly see that with each version of Ruby, objects became more and more powerful. We have some new cool methods to express some matters shorter and more atomically. We will not stop on it. It's pretty obvious, just one small note that probably if at some point in history refinements would become a thing, these hygienic monkey patches, then probably our objects would become more powerful. But I don't know what makes to save refinements from their current semi-doomed state. But more interesting, the things about that happening in Ruby that helps shaping the flow, making it less like your grandma's basic, which variable equals something, variable equals something, call method variable equals something, and more obvious flow of data, more obvious and explicit flow of values. Some examples. Then, which allows us to chain singular object operations the same way we are used to chain operations on collections. Then is, okay, I am not objective, I invented the name at least, if not the concept, but I believe that it's one of the very cool but very underestimated things in recent versions of Ruby, which we use in production like everywhere, and it shows the good value for cleaning up the code and some interesting consequences like your homemade maybe monad, like unpacking of values. So typically most of our methods are looking if they're at least some good, they are looking like one chain of input value with enumerable, with then, and so on, to output value. So it's just one statement, sometimes really long, but it's one statement clearly showing what goes where. Now, another cool thing that came in recent versions, enumerator chaining, which allows to make one enumerator of many enumerators, even if they are lazy or side effect less or slow. New in Ruby 2.7 method enumerator produce, which already existed in some of languages, and which allows us to convert other cycles like while and endless loop and something into the same enumerators as Ruby converted 4 ages ago. It could be hard to grasp from the first moment, but it's very cool. Now, when we used these new features to shape the flow, we want to like feel the flow, making our blocks more atomic, more visible, more functional and dry. And there are several things in Ruby that happen to allow to make blocks more atomic and of entire flow more visible. The symbol to procs, which lead to a lot of consequences. They're happening in Ruby 2.5 ability to pass the pattern in old meaning of the word, something responding to 3 equals case equality operator to all, to any, and new more powerful patterns came with endless and beginless ranges. And in Ruby 2.6 we became able, I don't think that the last feature of this slide is highly used in production currently, but theoretically it also changes the expressive power of the language with making more combinable things to be able to pass to the blocks. One counterexample to atomic things in the flow, numbered parameters coming to Ruby 2.7. They are kinda cool and kinda hip, but all they do is a small syntax sugar, which doesn't change the expressive power of the block. It just saves some keystrokes. It doesn't have like deep consequences that now our blocks became something more powerful. And my beloved example, method references. Yeah. Spoiler alert for those who saw the keynote. So method references, it is already, even if not well known, but super useful feature, even if an old form that was always possible even in old Rubies, that instead of making block and calling the method inside it, you just pass the method to the block. It's a bit long, but it's nice in a way that it helps design methods so they accept only what should came from flow, and design objects so they have very focused method. So we use it a lot, and it shows its usability. And in Ruby 2.7 almost came the feature which allowed to make method references like atomic statement. It would have been so cool. And it would probably lead, if will be accepted by the community, if it will be used and seen as something cool, it would probably lead to some new approaches to current, to partial application, and general shift Ruby towards more functional ways without like totally changing the syntax or dropping like Chinese hieroglyph into Slavic language. But things happen, and that would be our last section. Here I wanted to speak a bit about like polarizing reaction to language changes and how people not always happy with it, and how I myself not always happy with it, and where it leads us, and how to cope with it. This nice barn I met on the way from Atlanta to Nashville on Greyhound. I am not as pessimistic as this barn, but it seems like appropriate for this section of the talk. So, yeah, initially this slide had some examples from some Reddit users complaining of some new feature, of some Twitter influencers complaining on some new feature, but unluckily for my mood, but luckily for the talk's point, just 2 weeks before the conference, method reference operator was reverted with this explanation. I am still feeling like very confused about it. I asked my cat to illustrate how confused I feel. But I don't want to brag about it. I want to illustrate the. I wanted to illustrate the point that it's even if you are not really humble, like I am not really humble, I know. And sometimes I think, yeah, I know where Ruby moves, so I just suggest to core team some changes which is in that direction. And you might humble again when core team thinks, no, we don't do it. And this different reactions to changes of feature, they fall into a lot of very different forms. And a lot of times the formulations are not really showing what people really think, because sometimes they think that, oh, I haven't thought about this feature this way, and if I haven't thought of it this way, then probably it's bad. It's a bad feature. I will not even try it. Or they think, I like this particular syntax, and this new change makes that particular syntax I write like an old habit, and I want my habits to become retrograde, and so I will be against it. When we are talking about like, oh, people started to leave, okay. When we are talking about like language performance, about concurrency, there are some disturbances, but generally everybody agrees, okay, that's good, we need it. But when you talk about syntax changes, about semantic changes, it's a very, very heated topic, because, well, you can't really fight feelings, like feeling it's unreadable or it's an ugly, and I will not even try to get used to it. But probably what we can do is trying to walk in each other's shoes, trying new features, thinking about them in a good faith, and trying to understand where it can lead us if we agree to them. Another important thing about Ruby evolution is that there is no one right way to write Ruby. That different groups coming from different grounds will say that this is good, this is bad. We write this way, no, we write that way. RubyConf complains about this, and anybody ever tried to run RubyConf against Ruby's standard library? It's an interesting experience. That's also the thing that makes evolution harder, because we are very, very far from consensus that Ruby is this thing, so let's move it there. Because if for different people Ruby is 10 different things and they want to move it in 10 different directions, what can you do? And here I'd like to talk a bit about elephant in the room, about the fact that, OK, we are on RubyConf, but we know that the vast majority of Rubies are Railsists. That's not the point where I am saying, wow, Rails is evil. That's the point when I am saying that Ruby initially, at least how I understand it, it came as a language for hacking, for quick hacking in a good sense of the word, for quick prototyping, for playing, for teaching children. And to be completely honest, being in the domain of like large enterprise applications that should be super robust and super scalable is not 100% natural for Ruby. And what is more important that in domains where it's like business values are very important, there are a lot of like microeconomy or immediate economy of effort, of cognition, and so like highly competitive startups, they will say, OK, we will not use new Ruby features because then we can't hire developers from another languages because they would be freaked out. So, and but what I believe is that with Ruby, even for large enterprise applications, for this business world, we can be incredibly effective. We can be absolutely awesome, not by just throwing some cool tricks, but by always trying to be super clear about our intentions, super expressive about what exactly we want to say, super vigilant about the code that expresses exactly the meanings we wanted it to express. But also we could, well, one could dream, right? We could dream about where Ruby could or maybe still probably can thrive in different areas and where different Ruby qualities would be valued, where different choices would be made, where we will eventually have like more rich and more appreciated by the external world language. And as I started with a quote of a famous novel, I want to add with a quote from a famous novel. It's from Milan Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being, the novel about how light it is to make the choice. Why it is light? Because you will never check whether it would be a right choice, because you will never live through this moment again. So maybe, to be grumpy a bit, maybe our window of opportunity is already closed and we will always have our Ruby as a nice, more expressive, modern-day PHP. Not to say bad words about PHP, but it's just too small domain for such awesome language. But maybe I still hope that we can do more. And I still really love Ruby, and I really hope that you do too. So that's it.